He stood in the doorway, gripping the brass key to the house we were supposed to close on in 48 hours. He delivered the line like he had practiced it in the mirror. "She is back. Maybe we should just be friends." He expected me to beg, but engineers do not hope. We verify. I stared at his white knuckles and simply started counting down the seconds until his story collapsed. "My name is Addison Stewart. I am 36 years old. I design storm-hardening systems for coastal power grids. My entire professional life is built on a single, immutable principle, which is that if you account for every variable, the structure holds. I do not deal in hope. I deal in load-bearing limits and failure points. I verify." So when Graham Sutter stood in the doorway of our rented apartment, looking like a man who had rehearsed his lines in the rearview mirror of his car, I did not feel the sudden, crushing weight of heartbreak. I felt the cool, detached sensation of a diagnostic check running in the back of my mind. He was holding the key. It was a heavy brass key with a slightly torn paper tag, belonging to the renovated craftsman house on the bluff outside of town, the house we had spent 6 months fighting over, the house where the painting contractors were scheduled to start in exactly 48 hours. Graham cleared his throat. He was wearing his serious face, the one he used when he was editing a documentary, and wanted to explain to me why a shot of a plastic bag blowing in the wind was actually a metaphor for the human condition. "She is back," he said. The words hung in the air, heavy and ridiculous. "Maybe we should just be friends." He said it as if friendship was a clean exit. He said it as if demoting me from fiancé to friend was a kindness, a soft landing he had graciously prepared for me. He expected me to shatter. He expected the Addison who cried during animal welfare commercials to collapse onto the floor, but he had forgotten that the Addison who cries at commercials is not the same Addison who manages high-risk infrastructure projects. I looked at his hands. His knuckles were white. He was gripping that brass key so tight the metal must have been biting into his palm. I looked at the entry table. His phone was placed face down, not just set down, but deliberately placed screen to surface, silence mode. I looked at the tag on the keyring. It was ripped near the metal loop, fresh white paper fibers exposed against the yellow. He had grabbed it from the hook in a hurry. I did not cry. I did not argue. I did not ask him why he was doing this to us. I kept my voice perfectly level, the same tone I used when telling a contractor that their concrete pour was below code. "Which she?" I asked. Graham flinched. The script in his head had called for tears, not clarification. He shifted his weight, looking uncomfortable in his own skin. "Rowan," he said, and the name landed like a stone on glass. Rowan Pike, of course, the award-chasing conflict photographer turned activist storyteller, the woman who had left him 5 years ago to chase a revolution in Eastern Europe because Graham was not. In her words, visionary enough for her journey, she was magnetic, chaotic, and everything I was not. She was the storm, I was the shelter. Graham took a step forward, mistaking my silence for shock. He softened his voice, adopting a tone of condescending sympathy that made my stomach turn. "She reached out regarding a project," Graham said, his eyes wide with that fake sincerity he sold so well. "We met for coffee. It just became clear. Addison, we have a shared creative destiny. It is not something I can ignore." "Creative destiny." I almost laughed, he continued, gaining confidence now that I wasn't screaming. "You have been great, Addie. You really have. But you are so structured. You live in spreadsheets and risk assessments. Rowan and I, we thrive on the edge. I need that chaos to create. You deserve someone as safe as you are. Safe, structured." He was using my stability, the very thing that had paid his rent for the last 2 years while he looked for funding, as the weapon to sever the tie. He was rewriting our history in real time, in his new narrative. I was not the partner who supported him. I was the anchor holding him back from his artistic greatness. I looked at the key in his hand again. If he was leaving me for his creative destiny, if he was walking out the door to chase the sunset with Rowan Pike, there was one logical action he should have taken immediately. He should have put the key on the table. He did not put the key on the table. He was still holding it, He was massaging the brass ridges with his thumb. A switch flipped inside my brain. It was not rage. It was clarity. It was the sudden, sharp realization that the data set I was looking at did not match the verbal report, if he was breaking up with me. He surrendered his rights to the future we were building. That was the logic. That was the rule. But he was standing there, breaking my heart, while maintaining possession of the access point to my financial investment. "What happens to the house contract?" I asked. Graham blinked. He looked genuinely confused that I was talking about real estate instead of our lost love. "The house?" he asked, stalling. "And the house?" I asked. "Later," he said. Too fast. Eyes locked on the key. No lawyers, no ugliness. He looked down at the key, then back at me, a small, sad smile playing on his lips. "We will handle the logistics later," he said, his voice breezy. "We don't need to make this ugly with lawyers and contracts right now. We can figure out a way to coexist. The house is part of my story, too. You know, I found it. My story." The air in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. He did not want to leave. He wanted to pivot. He wanted to trade me in for Rowan Pike but keep the stability I provided. He wanted the house on the bluff because it fit the aesthetic of the successful filmmaker he pretended to be. He thought he could talk me into a corner. He thought he could use the "let's be friends" line to keep his name on the deed while Rowan moved her camera equipment into the spare room I had designed as my office. He thought I was weak because I was quiet. I took a breath, letting the oxygen fill my lungs, steadying my pulse. "You are right," I said. "We should not make this ugly." I saw the relief wash over him. He thought he had won. He thought the engineer had capitulated to the artist's superior emotional intelligence. He relaxed his grip on the key, but he did not let go. "I will pack a bag," I said. "I will stay at a hotel tonight." Graham nodded, looking benevolent. "Take your time. Addie, really, I will be here." I walked past him toward the bedroom to pack. As I passed, I glanced one last time at the key. The brass caught the light from the hallway fixture. He had no idea that I had already noticed the discrepancy. He had no idea that I knew the key wasn't just a symbol of our future. It was physical evidence, because 3 days ago, before he claimed Rowan had just reached out, that key had been in a sealed envelope in the realtor's lockbox. And the only way Graham could have that key in his hand right now, with the tag torn, was if he had accessed the property without me. He wasn't just leaving. He had already been there. He had already moved pieces on the board while I was busy working to pay for the game. I went into the bedroom and pulled my suitcase from the closet. I folded my shirts with precision. I packed my chargers. I packed my backup hard drives. He thought the conversation was over. He thought he was the protagonist of this story, the tragic hero making a hard choice for his art. He was wrong. He was just a variable that had failed a stress test. I zipped the suitcase. I did not cry. I checked my reflection in the mirror. My face was pale, but my eyes were clear. I would not fight for him. He was a sunk cost. But the house, the down payment, the reputation I had built in this town, I would burn his entire narrative to the ground before I let him take what was mine. I walked back out to the living room, where he was texting on his phone, likely telling Rowan that I had taken it well, that I was being reasonable. "I am leaving now." I said, "Okay," he said, not looking up. "Drive safe, Addie." I walked out the door and into the cool evening air. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I knew exactly where his story would collapse, and I intended to be the one to push the button. Looking back, it is easy to see the structural fatigue in a bridge after it collapses. You can trace the hairline fractures in the concrete, the rusted rebar, the ignored maintenance logs. It is much harder to see those things when you are driving over it at 60 miles per hour. Convinced that the road ahead is solid, our relationship did not begin with fireworks or a cinematic collision. It began with cheap white wine in plastic cups at a Morro Bay Chamber of Commerce mixer 3 years ago. I was there representing Blue Hollow Infrastructure, standing near the exit and checking my watch, calculating the exact minute I could leave without seeming rude. Graham was there filming B-roll for a local tourism spot, trying to make a room full of tired business owners look like a vibrant community hub. He approached me because I was the only person not trying to network. He made a joke about the humidity affecting his lens aperture, and I corrected him on the dew point. Most men would have walked away. Graham laughed. He told me later that he loved how I did not try to soften the edges of reality. He said I was grounded. At the time, I took it as a compliment. Morro Bay is a town defined by moisture. It sits on the edge of the Washington coast, wrapped in a permanent shawl of gray fog and salt spray. It is the kind of place where tourists come to buy overpriced driftwood sculptures and drink craft cider. But underneath the charm, the ground is unstable. The cliffs are eroding at a rate of 4 inches per year. The power grid is a patchwork of 1970s copper and hope. That is where I came in. As a senior systems engineer for Blue Hollow, my job was not to make things pretty. My job was to make them survive. I designed storm-hardening protocols for small coastal grids and water systems. I spent my days thinking about worst-case scenarios, king tides, subduction zone earthquakes, 100-year storms, and building redundancies to ensure the lights stayed on when the world went dark. Graham was the opposite. He was a documentary editor and director who specialized in what he called human-centric authenticity. He spent his days interviewing oyster farmers and retired loggers, cutting their stuttering sentences into profound monologues, adding swelling violin music, and selling it back to the public as raw truth. He craved reaction. He lived for the moment the audience gasped or wiped a tear. We thought we were a perfect balance. I provided the income and the stability. He provided the texture and the spontaneity. I kept us tethered to the earth. He kept us looking at the horizon. It felt functional. It felt like a system working as designed. When we decided to buy a house, we approached it with the same divided labor. I ran the budget analysis. Graham ran the emotional narrative. We found the place on a bluff 3 miles north of town. It was a renovated Craftsman, modest but dignified, with cedar shingles that had turned silver in the sea air. It was not a mansion. It was a symbol. For me, it was proof that I had built a life solid enough to own a piece of the earth. For Graham, it was a set piece. I remember the day we toured it for the second time. It was raining, a steady, relentless Pacific drizzle. I was in the basement with a flashlight, inspecting the sump pump and checking the foundation for water intrusion. I loved the basement. It smelled like dry concrete and dust. It was honest. Graham was upstairs in the living room, framing the view of the ocean with his hands like a camera lens. "This light. Addie." He shouted down the stairs. "Can you see this light? The mornings here are going to be incredible. I can set up my editing bay in the sunroom. It is perfect." I came upstairs, wiping dust from my hands. "The wiring is updated." I told him, "The panel is 200 amps. We won't need to upgrade the service drop for at least a decade." He looked at me with that soft, indulgent smile. "You and your wires," he said. "You are always looking at the guts of the thing. Someone has to," I replied. He wrapped his arms around me, resting his chin on my head. He felt warm. He felt safe. I let myself lean into him, ignoring the small voice in my head that noted he had not asked about the price or the mortgage rates. When it came time to make the offer, I wrote the check for the earnest money. It was $5,000, drawn from my personal savings account. Graham sat across the table, watching me sign with a look of intense pride, as if he were directing a scene about a couple making a life-changing decision. "Since you are handling the financing, let me handle the logistics," he said. He reached across the table and took the folder of realtor documents. "I want to feel useful. I can coordinate the inspections, talk to the agent, handle the scheduling. You are swamped with the reservoir project anyway." He was right. I was working 60-hour weeks redesigning a spillway gate for the county. I was exhausted. Handing off the administrative burden felt like a relief. I trusted him. He was my partner. That trust led to the conversation about the key. A week before the closing date, Graham came home from a meeting with the seller's agent. He seemed energized. buzzing with that specific frequency he got when he felt important. The seller is being weird about access, Graham told me, pouring himself a glass of wine. He is insisting on a strict lockbox protocol during inspection week. He says he does not want contractors coming and going without a record. That makes sense, I said, looking up from my laptop. It is liability protection. Exactly, Graham said. So, there is only one physical key in the box. The agent gave me the code so I can let the inspectors in on Tuesday and Thursday. I will be the point man. You don't have to worry about driving out there in the middle of the workday. I nodded, grateful. It was logical. It was efficient. We drove out to the house one last time before the final closing week. We stood on the porch, looking out at the gray water of the Sound. The fog was rolling in, obscuring the horizon, making the world feel small and intimate. Graham put his hand on the porch railing. The wood was damp. "This is it," he said, his voice low and serious. "This is our story. Addison, right here, this is where the next chapter starts." I looked at the sturdy columns supporting the roof. I looked at the flashing around the chimney, which looked brand new and watertight. "It is a good foundation," I said. Graham laughed. A short, sharp sound. "You know, sometimes I think you only see the world in blueprints, and sometimes I think you only see it in scenes." I countered. He squeezed my shoulder. "That is why we work. Babe, you build the stage. I put on the play." I smiled at him, believing it. I believed that his need for drama and my need for order were complementary forces. I believed that when he said our story, he meant a story that included me as a co-author, not just a supporting character who paid for the theater. I did not know then that he had already memorized the lockbox code. I did not know that while I was at work designing systems to keep water out, he was already planning how to let someone else in. I did not see the cracks. I only saw the fresh paint. We stood there for another 10 minutes, watching the fog swallow the coastline, holding hands like a couple who had everything figured out. Then we got in the car and drove back to the apartment, leaving the house empty on the bluff, waiting for a future that was already dissolving. The intrusion began with a vibration on the kitchen counter. It was a single notification on Graham's phone, arriving at 7:30 in the evening while I was rinsing arugula for a salad. Graham was chopping peppers, humming a tune I did not recognize. He glanced at the screen, and the humming stopped. He did not pick up the phone. He flipped it over. That was the first data point. "Who is it?" I asked, keeping my voice neutral. "Rowan." He said the name casually, but his shoulders had climbed an inch toward his ears. "She is back in the States. She wants some eyes on a pitch deck for a new climate documentary she is trying to sell to Netflix." I paused with the water running over my hands. A climate documentary. I spent 10 hours a day modeling hydraulic failure rates for coastal communities. I lived the climate crisis. Rowan Pike filmed it, added a filter, and won awards. "That makes sense," I said, turning off the faucet. "You are good with structure." Graham relaxed, misinterpreting my logic as permission. "Exactly. She has the raw footage, but she does not know how to weave the narrative. It is just a quick consult. One call, maybe two." It was not one call. The slide from one call to essential collaborator happened with the terrifying efficiency of a landslide. First, it was a Zoom meeting that ran 2 hours over because the creative energy was just flowing. Then it was a coffee meeting in the city because the Wi-Fi was lagging. Then it was a dinner to discuss ethical frameworking. I watched the orbit form. I looked Rowan up one night when Graham was in the shower. Her Instagram feed was a curated, chaotic aesthetic. Black and white photos of refugees, blurry shots of rain-streaked windows, selfies where she looked exhausted, but beautiful in a tragic way. She was intense. She was magnetic. She was the storm. I put my phone away. I was not the storm. I was the seawall. And seawalls are not exciting. They just stand there and take the beating until they crack. Graham's behavior shifted in the house. He started waking up at 5 in the morning to journal, something he hadn't done since he was 25. He bought new shirts, linen, unstructured, expensive. He started talking about impact and resonance instead of paying the electric bill, but the worst part was how he started treating me. One evening, I came home tired. The county had rejected my proposal for a secondary drainage sluice, and I was frustrated. I started venting to Graham while we were heating up leftovers. I was explaining the stupidity of the bureaucratic deadlock, listing the 3 code violations they were ignoring. Graham put his fork down with a loud clatter. "God, Addison, can you stop?" he snapped. I stopped mid-sentence. "Stop what?" "Stop bullet-pointing your life," he said. He made a gesture with his hand, like he was waving away a fly. "You talk about everything like it is a problem to be solved. You always sound like a project manager. Even with me, it is exhausting." The room went silent. The refrigerator hummed. "I am a project manager," I said quietly. "That is how we afford this apartment. That is how we are buying the house." Graham rolled his eyes. "There you go again. Transactional. Everything is a transaction with you. Rowan and I were talking about this today. Some people live in prose, and some people live in spreadsheets. He didn't just insult me, he compared me, and I had been found wanting. I realized then that he did not want a partner. He wanted a mirror. He wanted someone to reflect his own brilliance back at him, to clap when he spoke, to validate his delusions of grandeur. I asked questions. I verified facts. I was a mirror that showed him his wrinkles, and he hated me for it. The paranoia set in, but I kept it controlled. I did not scream. I did not snoop through his texts. I waited for an anomaly. It appeared on Sunday morning. We shared an older tablet that we kept in the living room for controlling the Sonos speakers and reading news. I picked it up to change the playlist. The calendar widget was synced to Graham's primary Google account. There, in the middle of the following week, was a block of 3 days grayed out. The title was in all caps, Rowan/Story Retreat. Retreat. My stomach turned over. A cold, hard flip. A pitch deck consult did not require a 3-day retreat. A retreat implied intimacy. It implied isolation. Graham walked into the room, holding a mug of coffee. I turned the tablet toward him. "What is this?" I asked. He looked at the screen, and for a split second, I saw panic. Then, he smoothed it over with a look of aggressive exasperation. "It is a workshop." "Addison," he said, walking past me to the window, "we need to lock ourselves in a room and hammer out the story beats before she pitches to the studio executives next month. It is purely professional." "Where?" I asked. "Does it matter?" He shot back. "Somewhere quiet. A cabin up the coast. You are going to a cabin for 3 days with your ex-girlfriend." I stated, "That is the data point." Graham spun around. "You are being controlling. This is why I can't breathe in this relationship sometimes. You are so threatened by my creative process that you try to strangle it. This is work. This is my career. You should be supporting me, not interrogating me like I am one of your contractors." He was flipping the script. He was using my rationality against me, painting my reasonable boundary as hysterical insecurity. He made me feel small. He made me feel guilty for noticing the obvious. "Maybe you are right," I said, retreating. I did not believe him, but I knew I could not win an argument based on feelings. I needed facts. I let it go. I let him think he had won. 2 days later, I was at my desk at Blue Hollow when my phone rang. It was the receptionist from the real estate agency. "Hi, Addison," she said cheerfully. "I just wanted to confirm that the pest inspector got into the house okay yesterday. I know Graham canceled the walkthrough with you, but I assumed he still let the tech in." I froze. My hand gripped the mouse so hard the plastic creaked. "Graham canceled the walkthrough?" I asked. "Yes," she said. "He called on Tuesday. Said you two had a conflict and couldn't make the joint walkthrough, but he would handle the access for the pest guy himself. Did he not tell you?" "No," I said, my voice steady. He must have forgotten. I hung up the phone. I sat there in the fluorescent light of my office, staring at my dual monitors. The walkthrough was supposed to be for us to measure the windows for curtains. It was a low-stakes appointment. I had not authorized a cancellation. Graham had lied. He had gone to the house alone. He had used the code. He had accessed the space that was supposed to be our shared future. And he had done it specifically to keep me away. Why? The answer was not in the spreadsheets, but the feeling in my gut was ancient and undeniable. He wasn't just working on a pitch deck. He was moving in. I looked at the calendar again. The story retreat started tomorrow. I didn't need to ask where the cabin was. I suspected I already owned it. The door opened at 6:45 in the evening. I was sitting on the gray sofa, a book on structural engineering open in my lap, though I had not turned a page in 20 minutes. Graham walked in. The air around him felt charged, vibrant, as if he had just come from a place where the oxygen was richer. He was wearing his favorite vintage denim jacket, the one I had patched for him last winter. In his right hand, hanging loosely by the brass ring, was the key to the house on the bluff. He did not put his keys in the bowl by the door. That was the first deviation from the protocol. He walked into the living room and stood in front of me. He looked pained. He looked like an actor preparing for a monologue that he desperately wanted to nail in the first take. "We need to talk." "Addie," he said. His voice was soft. It was that terrifying, fake soft tone people use when they are about to destroy you but want to feel virtuous while doing it. It was the voice of a surgeon explaining that the operation was technically a success. But the patient died. I closed my book. I placed it on the coffee table, aligning the edge with the coaster. "Okay," I said. He took a breath, looking at the floor, then at the ceiling, then finally, at me. He held the key up, fiddling with the torn paper tag. "She is back," he said. I waited. "Rowan," he clarified, as if I had not spent the last week watching her ghost move into our lives. "She is back, and maybe we should just be friends." There it was, the demolition charge. He looked at me with wide, wet eyes, waiting for the explosion. He wanted me to scream. He wanted me to throw the book. If I screamed, he could be the victim. If I screamed, he could say that my emotional volatility was the reason he had to leave. I sat perfectly still. My heart rate elevated, perhaps to 90 beats per minute, but my face remained slack. "Did you sleep with her?" I asked. The question was surgical. It cut through the fog of his soft voice and demanded a binary answer. Graham flinched. He looked offended. "Addison, please," he said, shaking his head as if I had said something crude. "It is not about that. You are reducing this to something cheap. This isn't about betrayal. It is about alignment." Alignment. I watched him pace a small circle on the rug. "Rowan and I, we speak the same language," he continued, his hands moving through the air. "This week at the retreat, it was undeniable. We tap into the same source. When I am with you, I feel safe. Yes, but with her, I feel amplified." He stopped and looked at me, tilting his head. "You deserve someone as sure as you are. Addie," he said, "you deserve a man who loves plans and schedules and predictability. I would only make you miserable in the long run. I am doing this for you. Really." I watched the architecture of his lie assemble itself in real time. He was rewriting the narrative. He was not abandoning the woman who had supported him financially for 2 years. No, he was setting me free. He was turning his selfishness into an act of noble sacrifice. He was the hero of his own breakup. I stood up. My legs felt heavy, but solid. "I do not need you to tell me what I deserve," I said. Graham sighed, looking disappointed that I wasn't accepting his gift of martyrdom. I ignored his emotional performance. I pivoted to the only thing that actually mattered in that moment: the asset. "What happens to the house contract?" I asked. The question hung in the air, sharp and cold. Graham blinked. He seemed genuinely unable to process that I was talking about escrow while he was talking about souls. "The house?" he repeated. "We are under contract." "Graham," I said, "I have paid $5,000 in earnest money. I have paid for the inspection. I have paid for the appraisal. The closing docs are drafted. What is your plan for the contract?" He paused. It was a pause that lasted exactly 3 seconds too long. He looked at the key in his hand, then back at me. "I will handle it," he said. His voice had shifted. The softness was gone, replaced by a quick, defensive clip. "How?" I asked. "I will talk to the realtor," he said, shifting his weight. "We can work something out. I mean, the house. It really fits the vision Rowan and I have for the documentary studio. It seems a shame to lose the property just because we are changing our relationship status." The heir left the room. He did not intend to cancel the contract. He intended to transfer the passenger. He wanted to swap me out for Rowan and keep the house I had found. The house I had negotiated for. The house I was paying for. He thought he could just inherit my labor because he felt he had a spiritual claim to the aesthetic. I looked at his hand. He was still holding the key. "Give me the key." "Graham," I said. I extended my hand, palm open. He did not move. "It is just a key." "Addie," he said, a nervous laugh bubbling up. "I need to get back out there tomorrow to meet the contractor for the studio soundproofing quote. I will give it to the agent when I see him. You are not on the deed yet." I said, "You have no legal right to access that property without me. Give me the key." I stepped forward. I reached out and my fingers brushed the brass. Graham's hand snapped shut. He tightened his grip, his knuckles turning white, pulling the key back against his chest. It was a reflex. It was primal. In that fraction of a second, everything was revealed. He wasn't just confused. He wasn't just an artist caught in a whirlwind of romance. He was a thief. He was holding on to that key because he had already moved pieces on the board without my consent. He had already promised that house to her. I looked at his fist, clenched tight against his denim jacket. Then I looked at his face. He looked defiant, like a child refusing to return a stolen toy. I did not fight him for it. Physical escalation was a variable I could not control, and the police report would not favor me. I lowered my hand. "Okay," I said. Graham exhaled, his shoulders dropping. He thought he had won. He thought I was capitulating. "I'm going to pack a bag," I said. I walked past him into the bedroom. I did not slam the door. I moved with efficiency. I took my laptop. I took the folder of bank records from the nightstand. I took my toiletries. When I came back out, he was standing by the window, looking at his phone. He was probably texting Rowan. She took it well. "We have the house." I walked to the door. My hand hovered over the knob. Graham looked up. "Take care of yourself." "Addie," he said. I looked at him one last time. I memorized the image. The man I had loved, standing in the apartment I paid for, holding the key to the future he was stealing. "If you are keeping access," I said, my voice flat and final, "then you are planning to return." I did not wait for his answer. I opened the door and walked out. I did not slam it. I closed it gently, until I heard the latch click into place. I walked down the hallway to the elevator, and as I descended, I did not think about the wasted years. I thought about the lockbox. I thought about the escrow account. I thought about the fact that Graham Sutter had just declared war on a systems engineer, and he didn't even know the battle had begun. I spent the first 48 hours sleeping on a pull-out couch in the living room of Sarah, a junior analyst at my firm. Sarah was kind. She bought cheap wine and offered to slash Graham's tires. I declined the tire slashing. Vandalism provides a momentary dopamine spike, but it introduces legal variables that are difficult to control. I did not want chaos. I wanted to understand the failure point. I went to work the next morning. I sat in my ergonomic chair, adjusted my dual monitors, and routed power load simulations for a substation in Oregon. To the outside observer, I was functioning within normal parameters. I answered emails. I attended the stand-up meeting. I drank my coffee black. But inside my head, a secondary process was running. It was a forensic loop. Replaying the last 6 months of my life, searching for the corrupted data I had missed. During my lunch break, I did not eat. I logged into the secure portal for the title company handling our escrow. I needed to formally terminate the contract. It was a standard administrative task. I intended to send a notification to the escrow officer to hold the funds until Graham and I signed a mutual release. I navigated to the transaction history tab. My eyes scanned the ledger. Deposit, $5,000. Received 30 days ago. Inspection fee, paid. Appraisal fee, paid. Then I saw it. There was a flagged entry from 3 days prior. It was labeled, Draft Request, Earnest Money Disbursement. I clicked on the metadata. The request had been initiated at 2 a.m. on a Tuesday. It asked for the $5,000 to be returned, not to the originating account, my savings account, but to a routing number I did not recognize. I felt a cold prickle at the base of my neck. I expanded the access log. The request was submitted from an IP address that I knew by heart. It was the IP address of the router in our apartment. Specifically, the MAC address tied to Graham's MacBook Pro. I sat very still. The hum of the server room down the hall seemed to get louder. He hadn't just decided to leave me. He had tried to take the down payment with him. I picked up my desk phone and dialed the escrow officer. My hand was steady, but my chest felt like it was being compressed by a hydraulic press. "This is Addison Stewart," I said when she answered. "I am looking at a disbursement request on the file." "Oh, hi Addison," she said, her voice bright and professional. "Yes, your fiancé called about that. He wanted to know the timeline for liquidating the escrow if the sale fell through. He mentioned you two were looking at a different property." "He called?" I asked. "Yes," she confirmed. "He was asking about signature coordination. He wanted to know if he could sign the release on your behalf if he had a power of attorney. I told him we would need the actual notarized document. Obviously." I closed my eyes. He had tried to cash me out. He had sat in our living room, probably while I was asleep in the bedroom, and tried to figure out how to navigate the banking regulations to steal $5,000 of my money. He viewed it as his severance package. I did not correct her. I did not scream. "I see." I said, "Please freeze all activity on the file. Do not release any funds without my voice verification and a wet signature. Is that clear?" "Absolutely," she said, the brightness dimming slightly. "Is everything okay?" "Everything is under review." I said. I hung up. I did not call Graham. I did not text him to ask how he could be so low. Confrontation without leverage is just noise. Instead, I opened a new folder on my secure drive. I named it GS_audit. I took screenshots of the portal history. I downloaded the access logs. I pulled the phone records that showed his call to the title company. I traced the routing number he had entered for the transfer. It was a new checking account at a digital bank. Opened 2 weeks ago. I was building a repository of evidence. I did not know what I would use it for yet. But engineers do not throw away data just because it is painful to look at. An hour later, my department head, Marcus, knocked on my doorframe. He looked harried. He was holding a thick file. "Addison, do you have a minute?" he asked. I turned away from my screen. "Yes, we have a situation in Louisiana," he said, tossing the file onto my desk. "Red Ash County. It is a nightmare. Saltwater intrusion is eating the pumps, and the local utility is overwhelmed. They need a lead engineer on site to overhaul the resilience strategy. It is a 6-month deployment, minimum." He paused, looking at me. "I know you are closing on a house, so I assume you are out, but I had to ask." I looked at the file. Red Ash County, a place where the ground was sinking and the water was rising, a place where the systems were failing and needed someone to impose order on the chaos. It sounded perfect. "I am not closing on the house," I said. Marcus blinked. "Oh, I am sorry. Don't be." I said, "I will take the assignment. When do I leave?" "Monday," he said. I spent the weekend packing. I did not pack like a woman mourning a relationship. I packed like a soldier deploying to a combat zone. I went to the storage unit I had rented. I sorted my life into categories: essential, long-term storage, and disposal. I created an inventory list on my tablet. Item 14, winter coats. Item 15, engineering reference library. Item 16, the box of letters Graham wrote me during our first year. I taped the box of letters shut. I did not burn them. I did not cry over them. I simply logged them as non-critical assets and stacked them at the bottom of the unit. Behind the box of kitchen appliances, my feelings were not allowed to drive the car. They were passengers, strapped into the back seat, gagged if necessary. Motion gave me oxygen, as long as I was moving, as long as I was labeling boxes and canceling utility accounts. I did not have to feel the gaping hole in my chest where my trust used to be. On Sunday night, my last night in Morro Bay, I sat on the floor of Sarah's living room surrounded by my luggage. The car was packed. The gas tank was full. I was ready to disappear into the humidity of the deep south and fix broken water pumps until I forgot what Graham's voice sounded like. I made the mistake of opening social media one last time. It was the first thing on my feed. The algorithm knew. The algorithm is cruel. It was a photo posted by Graham. It was black and white, naturally. It showed a view of the ocean, taken from a low angle, looking up at the dunes. In the corner of the frame, out of focus, but unmistakable, was a woman's hand holding a camera. The caption read, "Sometimes you have to burn the script to find the real story, choosing truth over comfort." He had tagged Rowan Pike. Truth over comfort. He was sitting in the wreckage of the life I had built for him, using the camera I had bought him for his birthday, posting about truth while he tried to steal my earnest money. He was not just leaving me, he was erasing me. He was framing his betrayal as a spiritual awakening. I stared at the screen. I did not feel the urge to comment. I did not feel the urge to block him. I felt a cold, hard resolve settle in my gut, heavier than the concrete I used for foundations. He thought he was the director of this movie. He thought he had written me out of the script. I took a screenshot of the post. I added it to the GS_audit folder. Then I turned off my phone. I would go to Louisiana. I would fix the pumps. I would save the town. And when I came back, I would not be the structured, boring girlfriend he remembered. I would be the audit. Red Ash County was not a place for poets. It was a place where the map was being violently redrawn by the Gulf of Mexico, inch by muddy inch. The air was so thick with humidity and diesel fumes that you could taste it on your tongue. The ground was spongy, saturated with salt water that was slowly poisoning the water table, corroding the pumps, and turning the cypress trees into gray skeletons. It was brutal, it was ugly, and it was exactly what I needed. I thrived in Red Ash because the problems here were honest. When a lift station failed, it did not gaslight you. It did not tell you that it was failing because of a difference in creative alignment. It failed because the impeller was corroded or the voltage was unstable. Physics does not lie. Physics does not have a hidden agenda. My assignment was to lead a pilot project integrating storm-resistant microgrids with the county's emergency water distribution system. The goal was to ensure that even if the main transmission lines went down during a hurricane, the pumps would keep running, and the tap water would stay drinkable. I lived in a FEMA-grade trailer on the edge of the worksite. I wore steel-toed boots and a hard hat for 12 hours a day. I smelled like bug spray and electrical ozone. For the first time in years, my brain was quiet. I did not have to analyze the subtext of a conversation. I just had to calculate the load variance for a diesel generator. This was where I met Elliot Rains. Elliot was the field compliance counsel for Blue Hollow. In the corporate hierarchy, lawyers and engineers are natural enemies. We want to build things. They want to tell us why we cannot build them yet. But Elliot was different. He was a man who seemed to have been constructed out of the same durable materials as the infrastructure we were building. He was quiet, razor smart, and possessed a dryness of humor that rivaled the Sahara. He was allergic to drama. We met in the temporary site office, a double-wide trailer with air conditioning that rattled like a lawnmower. I was arguing with a local contractor about concrete curing times. The contractor was trying to charm me into approving a pour that wasn't ready. "I am not asking for a favor," the contractor said, grinning. "I am asking for flexibility." I looked at him. "Concrete does not have flexibility." I said, "It has a curing curve. If you pour today, it will crack in 3 years. Come back on Thursday." The contractor left, annoyed. I turned around and saw a man sitting at a folding table in the corner, reviewing a stack of permits. He didn't look up, but the corner of his mouth was twitching. Concrete does not have flexibility, he repeated to the paper in front of him. I might put that on my tombstone. I am Addison. I said, Elliot, he replied, finally looking up. He had calm, dark eyes that seemed to take in everything and give away nothing. Compliance. If you need a permit to breathe in this county, I am the one who gets it for you. Our bond was not built on happy hours or trauma dumping. It was built on competence. We spent long nights in that trailer, fueled by terrible vending machine coffee, going over easements and environmental impact statements. I grew to respect the way his mind worked. He treated the law the way I treated engineering, as a set of structural rules that, if mastered, could protect you from chaos. We did not flirt. There was no lingering eye contact or accidental touches. It was better than that. It was the relief of being around someone who expected you to do your job and did not require you to manage their ego. 3 months into the deployment, we were the last 2 people on site. A tropical depression was spinning off the coast, and the wind was rattling the trailer walls. We were securing the files. You are not from Louisiana, Elliot said. It was a statement, not a question. Washington, I said, filing a permission slip. Morro Bay, you ran far, he observed. He didn't say it with judgment. He said it like he was reading a data set. I stopped filing. I looked at the rain lashing against the window. I needed a project that required 100% of my bandwidth. I admitted. Elliot nodded. He leaned back in his chair, spinning a pen between his fingers. Bad breakup? I hesitated. Usually, this was the part where people offered pity. Oh, you poor thing. He didn't deserve you. I didn't want pity. Pity felt sticky. He was an artist, I said, keeping it brief. He decided our lives were a story, and he wanted to write a new chapter with his ex. Elliot did not wince. He did not offer a platitude. He stopped spinning the pen. What did he try to take? He asked. I blinked. It was such a specific, cynical, accurate question. Excuse me? When people leave like that, suddenly, claiming high moral ground, they are usually covering a theft. Elliot said, emotional theft, financial theft, reputational theft. They always try to take something with them to fund their new start. So, what did he try to take? I sat down on the edge of the desk. The hum of the air conditioner filled the silence. The earnest money. I said, $5,000. He tried to wire it out of the escrow account to a new bank account he set up. He tried to sign my name. Elliot's face went very still. The casualness vanished. He sat forward, and suddenly I was looking at a very dangerous lawyer. Did you report it? I stopped the transfer. I said, I have the logs. That is not what I asked. Elliot said, did you lock down the documentation? Did you pull the audit trail from the portal? Did you get a sworn affidavit from the escrow officer regarding the phone call? I have screenshots. I said, screenshots are good, Elliot said. His voice clipped and professional. Metadata is better. If he tried to access funds that were not his using credentials, he was not authorized to have. That is wire fraud. Addison, that is not a breakup. That is a felony. He pulled a legal pad toward him and uncapped a pen. Write down the dates. He commanded, I am going to draft a preservation letter for you to send to the title company and the bank. We need to ensure those records are not purged in their standard 90-day cycle. I watched him write, for the first time since Graham had walked out the door. I didn't feel like a victim. I felt like a client. I felt protected. He did not ask me if I was sad. He asked me for the timestamps. That night, lying in my bunk in the trailer, I realized something. I had not checked Graham's Instagram in 4 days. I had not looked to see if he was posting photos of the house I was supposed to live in. I had not wondered if he was happy. My mind was full of pump schematics and legal preservation letters. I felt a strange sensation in my chest. It was peace, not the fragile peace of ignoring a problem, but the solid peace of solving one. I fell asleep without counting the hours. 2 days later, Elliot called me into his office. The storm had passed, and the site was muddy but operational. Addison, come here, he said. I walked over to his desk. He had his laptop open. On the screen was the data dump from the escrow portal that I had shared with him. He had been running it through some kind of analysis software he used for compliance checks. I was looking at the IP logs you sent over. Elliot said, "You said he tried to transfer the money on the Tuesday before he left, right?" "Yes." I said, 2 in the morning. Elliot pointed to a line of code on the screen. "That is true," he said. "But look at this." I leaned in. I saw a string of numbers and a timestamp. He accessed the portal again. Elliot said, "My stomach dropped." "When?" "Yesterday." Elliot said, "Yesterday?" I repeated. "But I changed the passwords. I locked the account." He didn't log in. Elliot said, "He pinged the server. He was trying to use the password recovery function." "But look at the geolocation tag on the request." I looked at the coordinates. I didn't recognize them. "Where is that?" I asked. Elliot zoomed out on the map. It was not Washington. It was not a cabin in the woods. The blue dot was hovering over a location about 40 miles south of where we were standing right now. "He is in Louisiana," Elliot said. I stared at the screen. The air in the trailer seemed to vanish. "Why would Graham be in Louisiana?" I whispered. Elliot looked at me, and for the first time, I saw genuine concern in his eyes. He is not just here. Addison, he is looking for something, and he is trying to get into your financial records while he does it. The piece I had built over the last 3 months cracked. The ghost was back, and he was closer than I thought. The revelation that Graham was in Louisiana sat between us like an unexploded shell on the desk. But Elliot was not done. He was digging through the digital debris of my old life with the dispassionate efficiency of a coroner. He turned the laptop screen toward me. "Look at the timestamps," Elliot said. His voice was low, stripped of any humor. I leaned in. I saw a log of login attempts. "Here is the escrow access we found," Elliot pointed out. "But look at this one. 2 weeks before you broke up." I squinted at the line of code. It was a login to the Blue Hollow remote server. It was my username, my credentials. I worked from home. I whispered. I sometimes left my laptop open on the kitchen island while I was cooking or running laundry. Graham knew my passcode. He said he needed it once to check a flight reservation confirmation in my email. Elliot nodded. He did not lecture me on cybersecurity. He knew that love often looks like shared passwords until it looks like theft. He accessed the shared drive. Elliot said, "Specifically, the folder marked Forward Planning/Coastal Prototypes." He downloaded 3 files. I felt a coldness spread through my chest that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. The Coastal Prototypes folder contained the preliminary research for the Red Ash project. It contained the proprietary designs for the hybrid pump systems. It contained the maps. He knew. I realized. He knew I was coming here before I did. Graham did not just stumble upon a documentary subject in Louisiana. He had scouted it. He had used my work access to find a story that had high conflict and high visual stakes, and then he had positioned himself to film it. He wasn't just sentimental about the house, I said, my voice shaking slightly. He was harvesting materials. He was researching his next project. And the research material was me. Elliot closed the laptop. "We need to be sure," he said, "and then we need to bury him." The confirmation arrived the next morning in the form of an email sent to the general inquiry inbox of the Blue Hollow on-site team. The project administrator forwarded it to me with a note that said, "This looks like a PR opportunity. Thoughts?" I opened the email. The subject line read, "Request for access. Capturing the human spirit of resilience." I did not need to see the signature to know who wrote it. The syntax was unmistakable. It was Graham. To the engineering team. The email began, "We represent the Lighthouse Media Collective, a nonprofit dedicated to telling the visceral, untold stories of climate adaptation. We are looking to embed with a team that values truth over infrastructure. We want to capture the texture of the struggle, the raw interplay between man and the rising tide. Visceral, texture, truth over infrastructure." I could hear his voice saying the words. I could see him using his hands to emphasize the word raw. He did not sign it with his own name. He signed it, "The production team, Lighthouse Media Collective. I printed the email and walked it over to Elliot's office. I placed it on his desk. He is fishing, I said. Elliot read it once. He typed the name of the nonprofit into a database. Registered 3 weeks ago in Delaware. Elliot noted without looking up. The address is a mailbox rental service in a strip mall. No board of directors listed. Just a registered agent. It is a shell. He looked at me. Here's the play, Elliot said. He needs credibility. Rowan needs a comeback. They have the camera gear and the artistic pretension, but they do not have the access. They cannot just walk onto a federal infrastructure site and start filming. They need us to invite them in. They want to use your work as the backdrop for their redemption arc. They want to make a movie about me saving this town. I realized, but they want to edit it so they look like the heroes who discovered the story. I felt a surge of nausea, followed immediately by a surge of adrenaline. Graham had called me boring. He had called me structured, and yet he was trying to build his career on the foundation of my labor. Again, we are not going to reply. I said, no, Elliot said, a dangerous smile touching his lips. We are going to reply, but we are not going to give them what they want. We are going to give them something better. We are going to give them a lie. We spent the afternoon constructing the trap. It was a piece of counter-engineering. We created a confidential media packet, ostensibly for their review. It looked legitimate. It had the blue hollow letterhead. It included maps of the Red Ash levee system. It included projected failure timelines. But the data was fake. I adjusted the saltwater intrusion rates by 40%. I moved the location of the critical pump station 3 miles to the east, into a swamp that was completely inaccessible, and then Elliot added the tracker. He embedded a pixel in the PDF. It was invisible to the naked eye, but the moment the file was opened, it would ping a server with the user's location and device ID. But the real kill switch was the watermark. Elliot applied a digital steganography filter to the images. It was a technique used to track leaks in high-security contracts. Across the background of every map and chart, invisible unless you ran it through a specific polarization filter, was a repeating pattern of text. The text read, Property of Blue Hollow, Unauthorized Use, Demo Only. If they used any of these images in a pitch deck, if they showed them to a potential investor, they would be planting a legal bomb in their own presentation. We sent the packet to the Lighthouse Media Collective email address at 4 a.m, along with a polite note saying we were reviewing their request and providing these materials for internal background only. Then we waited. Engineers are good at waiting. We wait for concrete to cure. We wait for load tests to stabilize. We wait for the storm to hit. It took exactly 48 hours. I was in the trailer, reviewing the morning reports, when Elliot called me. Got him, he said. I walked to his office. He had a browser window open. The tracking pixel fired. Elliot said, the packet was opened in New Orleans, and then, 2 hours later, it was forwarded. Forwarded to who? I asked. Elliot clicked a key. To an email address associated with a boutique talent agency in Los Angeles. He said, and then, because people are stupid and lazy, that agency uploaded a preview of their new venture's slate to a password-protected Vimeo link for their investors. Elliot turned the screen toward me. I cracked the password, he said casually. It was the agency's name and the year. He pressed play on the video. It was a sizzle reel. The music was swelling violins. Graham's signature. The images were quick cuts of storms, flooding, and crying children. And then, at the 20-second mark, a graphic appeared on the screen. It was a map of Red Ash County. It was my map, the fake map, the one with the pump station in the wrong place. Superimposed over the map were the words, The Rising, a Rowan Pike film. I stared at the screen. The image was slick. It looked professional, and it was stolen property. Elliot paused the video. He tapped the screen. Right there, he said. You can't see it. But the watermark is woven into the pixels. If we drag this into court, or if we send a cease and desist to their investors, we can prove not only that they stole it, but that they are pitching a project based on fabricated data. He looked at me. They are selling a lie. Addison. And we have the receipt. I looked at the map again. I looked at the name Rowan Pike plastered over my work. I finally understood the symbol of the key. When Graham stood in the doorway of our apartment holding the key to the house, I thought he was just being cruel. I thought he was trying to keep a piece of real estate. I was wrong. The key wasn't about the house. The house was just a container. Graham wanted access. He wanted access to the stability I provided. He wanted access to the stories I found. He wanted access to the world of substance that he could never quite touch on his own. He kept the key because he thought it gave him the right to come back whenever he ran out of material. He thought I was a resource he could mine forever. He was about to find out that the mine had collapsed. I looked at Elliot. "Do not send the cease and desist yet," I said. Elliot raised an eyebrow. "No? No," I said. I felt a cold, calm certainty settling over me. If we stop them now, they will just pivot. They will find another story. They will find another victim. I pointed to the screen. "Let them build the deck," I said. "Let them pitch it. Let them get the investors in the room. Let them stake their entire reputation on this project. I want them to be standing on the stage when the floor falls out." Elliot smiled. It was a terrifying, beautiful smile. "Understood," he said. "We let them dig the hole." I walked back out into the humidity of the Louisiana afternoon. The sun was setting, turning the sky a bruised purple. I took a deep breath. Graham wanted a story. I was going to give him one, but he wasn't going to be the director. He was going to be the cautionary tale. He appeared on the perimeter of the work site on a Tuesday afternoon, standing just outside the orange safety fencing like a glitch in the simulation. I was calibrating a pressure sensor on the secondary outflow pipe. My hands covered in grease and bayou mud. I felt eyes on me. It is an instinct you develop when you work in high-risk environments. The sensation that a variable has entered the equation without authorization. I looked up. Graham was leaning against a rented Jeep Wrangler, wearing a vintage linen shirt that cost more than my weekly per diem and sunglasses that reflected the harsh Louisiana sun. He looked out of place, like a catalog model dropped into a disaster zone. He waved. It was a small, hesitant wave, designed to look sheepish. I did not wave back. I wiped my hands on a rag, walked over to the site supervisor, and told him I was taking my break. I walked toward the fence. As I got closer, I could see the performance initiating. He took off his sunglasses. He ruffled his hair. He arranged his face into a mask of tentative hope. "Addison," he said. He said my name like it was a question he was afraid to ask. "Hello?" "Graham," I said. My voice was flat. I did not ask what he was doing there. I knew what he was doing there. He was scouting locations for the stolen narrative he was building on my laptop. "I was in the area," he said, gesturing vaguely at the miles of swamp and dying cypress trees around us. "For the project, we are looking at resilience narratives along the coast. I heard you were running the Red Ash pilot." He paused, waiting for me to be impressed that he had tracked me down. I stayed silent. "Look," he said, dropping his voice to that intimate register he used to use when he wanted me to pay the dinner bill. "I know this is weird, but I saw you from the road, and I couldn't drive by. Can we get coffee? Just as friends? 5 minutes. I looked at him. A normal person would have told him to go to hell. A hurt person would have screamed. But I was not a normal person anymore. I was an investigator building a case file, and investigators do not turn down an opportunity to interview the suspect. There is a diner half a mile up the road. I said, "I will meet you there." I drove my truck. He followed in the Jeep. The diner was a corrugated metal shack that smelled of frying oil and old coffee. We sat in a booth with red vinyl seats that were cracked and taped over with silver duct tape. Graham looked at the duct tape with a mixture of disgust and fascination, probably wondering if it would make a good B-roll shot for his film. The waitress poured us coffee. I drank mine black. Graham asked if they had oat milk. They did not. He wrapped his hands around the mug, looking down into the dark liquid. "I have missed you, Addie," he said softly. I watched him. I analyzed the statement. It was a deployment of emotional ordnance. I have been busy. I said, the saltwater intrusion rates are higher than projected. He chuckled. A sad, knowing sound. Still the engineer, always the facts. He looked up, locking eyes with me. I'm sorry about how things went down in Marrow Bay. He said, I really am. I know it felt abrupt to you, but you have to understand. When the muse calls, you have to answer. I hated hurting you. I really did. I noted the phrasing. I hated hurting you. Not, I am sorry I betrayed you. Not, I'm sorry I tried to steal your money. He was apologizing for my reaction, not his actions. It is fine, I said. He seemed surprised by my lack of resistance. He expected a fight. He expected me to demand closure so he could withhold it. So, he said, leaning in, how is life? Are you seeing anyone? He was fishing. He wanted to know if I was vulnerable. I am working. I said, this project requires 12 hours a day. And the house? He asked. His tone was casual. Too casual. Did you end up closing on the place on the bluff? There it was. The real question. He needed to know if the set piece was still available. The contract is being managed. I said. He frowned slightly. That wasn't a yes or a no. It was a non-answer. You know, he said, tracing the rim of his mug. I think about that house a lot. It had such good bones. I can still see the light in that sunroom. It felt like us. I took a sip of coffee. It was bitter and burnt. It is a structure. Graham, I said, it is wood and glass. It does not have feelings. He sighed. Leaning back, you are so hard. Addie, you have gotten harder since you came down here. I did not tell him that diamond is the hardest substance on earth, and it is formed under pressure. I just looked at him. He decided to change tactics. He decided to deploy the nuclear option. Rowan thinks you are amazing, by the way. He said. He dropped the name like a coin into a slot machine, waiting for the payout. He wanted to see my eye twitch. He wanted to see the jealousy flare up so he could feel desirable. She was looking at some of the data you sent over. He continued, lying smoothly about the stolen files. She said, Graham, your ex is a genius. We were talking about you last night at the hotel. He was triangulating. He was putting me in a room with him and his new lover, trying to make me compete for his approval. I looked at him, and I felt absolutely nothing. No jealousy, no anger, just the cold realization that he was small. He was a small man chasing big things he did not understand. That is generous of her. I said. Graham blinked. He looked unsettled. The triangulation had failed. He shifted in his seat. The charm began to fracture. Look, Addie, he said, putting his hand on the table, inching it toward mine. The reason I stopped is, well, we are filming here for a few weeks, and I was thinking, we could use a technical consultant, someone who knows the systems. He smiled. It was the smile of a shark that thinks it is a dolphin. We could collaborate, he said. A clean reset. You, me, Rowan. We could make something beautiful together. You could get a credit on the film. It would be good for your career, and it would mean we could be in each other's lives again. I think we make a good team, don't you? He was offering me a job on the documentary he was making with stolen materials. He was inviting me to be a footnote in my own exploitation. He framed it as a favor. He framed it as granting me permission to be near him. I looked at his hand on the table. I looked at the way his fingers were splayed, relaxed, confident. Then I looked at his pocket. The outline of a keyring was visible against the linen of his trousers. I did not reach for his hand. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the table. If you want to be friends, Graham, I said, my voice very quiet. If you want a clean reset, then hand me the key. He froze. What? The key to the house. I said, you still have it. I know you have it. Give it to me. He pulled his hand back. He laughed, a nervous, brittle sound. Oh, come on. Addie, he said, it is just a key. It is a souvenir. It doesn't mean anything. If it doesn't mean anything, I said. Then you do not need to keep it. He shifted his weight. His eyes darted to the door, then back to me. I don't have it on me. He lied. I looked at his pocket. He saw me looking. He knew that I knew. He forced a smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. His eyes were cold. You are being weird about this, he said. It is just a piece of brass. Why does it matter so much? Because, I said, holding his gaze, it is the only thing you have left that makes you feel like you still own me. The air in the diner seemed to stop moving. The sound of the frying oil faded away. Graham's face changed. The soft boy mask slipped. The tortured artist mask slipped. Underneath was something petulant and ugly. He leaned in, his voice dropping to a whisper. You think you are so smart, he hissed, but you are just a mechanic. Addison, you fix pipes. I create culture. You should be begging to be part of what I am doing. I stood up. I placed a $5 bill on the table for the coffee. I am not begging. Graham, I said, I am counting. Counting what? He snapped. I looked down at him. I am counting the days until you realize that you are not the one holding the camera anymore. I said, I turned to leave. And Graham? I said, pausing. He looked up. His jaw clenched. If you are going to keep that key, I said, then you won't mind losing it. I saw the confusion in his eyes. He didn't understand. He thought I meant losing the key physically. He didn't know I meant he was about to lose the lock, the door, the house, and the ground he was standing on. His smile finally broke. It shattered into a look of pure, unadulterated doubt. I walked out of the diner and into the heat. I got into my truck and drove back to the site. I had pumps to fix, and Graham Sutter had a storm coming that he couldn't edit his way out of. The difference between a tantrum and a takedown is structure. If you explode, you create chaos, and chaos allows the other person to control the narrative. They can call you crazy. They can call you bitter. But if you sequence the consequences, if you lay them out like bricks in a retaining wall, there is no room for spin. Elliot sat on the edge of my desk in the site trailer, reviewing the agenda for the meeting. He will try to charm the room, Elliot warned. He will try to make this about feelings. Do not let him. If he talks about art, you talk about intellectual property. If he talks about relationships, you talk about unauthorized access statutes. I nodded. I was not wearing my field gear. I was wearing a navy blazer and a clean white shirt. I looked corporate. I looked like the person who signed the checks. We had approved the Lighthouse Media Collective request for a site visit, but we had not scheduled it for the open muddy field where Graham could shine his smile at the construction crew. We had scheduled it for the conference room in the administrative modular unit at 10 in the morning. Graham arrived 5 minutes late. He walked in with a bounce in his step, carrying a leather messenger bag, looking every inch the visionary director ready to grace us with his attention. Hi, everyone, he said, flashing a smile. Sorry. The light was just incredible on the drive over. Had to stop for a... He stopped. He had expected to see me. Maybe an intern. Instead, he was facing a tribunal. I sat at the head of the table. To my right was Elliot. To my left was Marcus, the regional project director for Blue Hollow, and a woman named Linda from corporate compliance who had flown in from Houston. Graham's smile faltered, then vanished. He gripped the strap of his bag. This looks formal, he said, letting out a weak laugh. I thought we were just doing a location scout. Please sit down. Mr. Sutter, Elliot said. His voice was pleasant, but it had the temperature of liquid nitrogen. Graham sat. He looked at me, his eyes pleading for a cue. Addie, what is this? I gave him nothing. I sat with my hands folded on the table, next to a thick file folder labeled Internal Audit. This meeting is regarding the materials submitted by your organization. Lighthouse Media Collective. Marcus began. We have some concerns regarding the provenance of the data in your pitch deck. Graham relaxed slightly. He thought this was a negotiation. Oh, sure, Graham said, leaning back, recovering his confidence. Look, we move fast. Sometimes the paperwork lags behind the creative vision. If we need to sign some NDAs, That is fine. We just want to tell the story of what you guys are doing here. It is heroic work. I opened the file. It is not about N. Diaz. Graham, I said, it is about theft. The word hung in the room. Graham stiffened. Theft? That is a heavy word. Addison. I slid a piece of paper across the table. It was the log of the login attempts to the Blue Hollow server, highlighted in yellow. On January 14th, I said, my voice steady. Credentials belonging to my user profile were used to access the proprietary Coastal prototype folder. The IP address matches your personal laptop. 3 files were downloaded. Graham stared at the paper. He didn't touch it. I might have checked something for you. He stammered. You used to ask me to check your email sometimes. I did not ask you to download proprietary engineering schematics 2 weeks before you broke up with me. I said. Elliot slid the next piece of paper. It was the metadata analysis of the decoy packet. And then, Elliot said, 3 days ago, you received a confidential media packet from this office. You were explicitly instructed that it was for internal review only. Graham shrugged. Trying to look persecuted. We are building a deck. We have to show investors what the project looks like. It is standard industry practice. Elliot pointed to the paper. The images in that packet contained a unique digital watermark. Elliot said, we found those images in a sizzle reel uploaded by your talent agency yesterday. You are soliciting funds using stolen, proprietary data that you were not authorized to distribute. Graham's face flushed a deep, angry red. You are criminalizing storytelling, he burst out. He looked at Marcus, then at Linda. This is what she does. She is obsessed with rules. I am an artist. I am trying to raise money to make a film that celebrates your work, and you are hitting me with timestamps? It is not storytelling. Mr. Sutter, Linda from Compliance said calmly, it is corporate espionage, and since you are soliciting federal grants, it is also wire fraud. Graham turned to me. His eyes were wild now. The mask was completely gone. You set me up, he hissed. You sent me those files so you could trap me. I did not deny it. I simply turned the page in my file. I also have the logs from the escrow portal. I said. Graham froze. You attempted to withdraw $5,000 of earnest money from the title company account. I continued. You tried to authorize a wire transfer to a personal account. You represented yourself as having power of attorney. That was our money, Graham shouted. He stood up, slamming his hands on the table. That was our house. I put sweat equity into that deal. I found the place. I managed the inspections. That money was part of our joint assets. I looked at him. I looked at the man who had called me boring. I looked at the man who thought his charm was a currency that could buy him anything. Actually, I said, that is the most interesting part. I pulled out the final document. It was a copy of the purchase agreement for the house on the bluff. You never read the contracts. Graham, I said, you were always too busy with the creative vision to look at the fine print. I slid the document toward him. When I made the offer on the house, I did not do it in my name, and I certainly did not do it in yours. I formed a single-member limited liability company to hold the asset. It is a standard practice for liability protection in my line of work. I pointed to the signature line. The buyer is AS Structural Holdings, LLC. I said, I am the sole member. You are not on the title. You are not on the loan. You are not on the LLC formation documents. Legally, you are a stranger to that transaction. Graham looked at the paper. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. So, I said, leaning forward slightly, the key you have been carrying around? The one you are holding on to like it is a bargaining chip? I paused. It is not proof of commitment. Graham, it is just proof that you have been pretending to own something that was never yours. You are holding a key to a door you have no right to open. Graham sank back into his chair. He looked small. He looked deflated. The room was silent. The only sound was the hum of the air conditioner. Then, a flicker of the old malice returned to his eyes. He realized he had lost the legal argument. He realized he had lost the financial argument. So he went for the only thing he had left. The mud. Fine, he spat. You want to play hardball? He pulled his phone out of his pocket. I have texts. Addison, I have emails. I have 3 years of private messages where you talk about your work, your colleagues, your insecurities. You want to ruin my reputation? I will go public. I will post every private thing you ever sent me. I will show the world how cold and calculating you really are. I will spin this so hard, you will never get a clearance again. He looked around the room, daring anyone to challenge him. I will ruin you, he whispered. Elliot didn't even blink. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a single, stapled document. He placed it gently on top of Graham's messenger bag. Mr. Sutter, Elliot said, sounding bored, that is a draft of a defamation complaint, along with a restraining order regarding the dissemination of private communications. Elliot looked him in the eye. If you release one text, if you post one screenshot, if you mention Ms. Stewart's name in a public forum again, we will file this within the hour. And given that your current pitch deck is built on fraudulent data, I imagine your investors, and Ms. Pike's sponsors, would be very interested to hear that you are currently the subject of an active intellectual property investigation. Graham looked at the document. He looked at Elliot. He looked at me. Rowan, I said softly. He looked up. Does she know? I asked. Does she know that the maps in her presentation are fake? Does she know that the exclusive access you promised her is a felony? Graham swallowed. His throat clicked. If she doesn't know, I said, she will soon, because we are sending a formal notice to the agency regarding the copyright infringement in the sizzle reel today. Graham closed his eyes. He realized then that the ground had not just shifted, it had opened up and swallowed him. He stood up. He picked up his bag. His hands were shaking. You are a monster, he said to me. I did not flinch. I am an engineer. Graham, I said, I verify. He turned and walked out of the room. He did not slam the door. He walked out like a man who was afraid that if he made a sudden noise, the rest of the building would collapse on top of him. When the door clicked shut, Marcus let out a long, low whistle. Remind me never to make you angry. Addison, Marcus said. I looked at the empty chair where Graham had sat. I looked at the file of evidence. It wasn't about anger, I said. Closing the folder, it was about structural integrity. I stood up. My legs felt steady. My hands were not shaking. Elliot looked at me. He didn't smile. He just nodded. A small, sharp movement of respect. We have work to do, I said. The pump station needs to be calibrated, and for the first time in 6 months, I walked out of a room feeling entirely light. The weight of the key was finally gone. Graham did not go quietly. Chaos, when cornered, tries to disguise itself as a victim. 2 weeks after the confrontation in the conference room, I was served with a countersuit. It was a desperate, flailing legal motion. Graham alleged that I had promised partnership in the property acquisition, and that he had invested sweat equity into our life that entitled him to a 50% share of the house on the bluff. He claimed I had used his artistic vision to increase the value of my own brand and was now discarding him. He was hoping for a settlement. He was hoping I would pay him $20,000 just to make him go away so I could avoid the embarrassment of a public hearing. He forgot that I deal with embarrassment the same way I deal with structural stress tests. I do not avoid it. I measure it. I did not settle. I told Elliot to schedule the hearing. The arbitration took place in a small, windowless conference room in the county courthouse 3 months later. It was not a cinematic courtroom. There was no gallery, no jury, just a retired judge sitting at the head of a mahogany table, looking tired. Graham wore a suit that fit him poorly, likely borrowed. He tried to charm the arbitrator. He spoke about emotional contracts and the unquantifiable labor of love. He cried. Just a little, at the perfect moment. When it was my turn, I did not cry. I opened my laptop. I walked the arbitrator through the timeline with the precision of a forensic audit. I presented the bank statements showing that every cent of the down payment came from my payroll account. I presented the access logs showing Graham had never logged into the mortgage portal until he tried to hack it. I presented the Lighthouse Media emails, the stolen watermarked maps, and the timestamps of his unauthorized downloads. Graham's lawyer tried to object, claiming this was about the relationship, not the data. The arbitrator looked over his reading glasses. In contract law, counselor, the data is the relationship. But the final blow came from Elliot. He stood up, looking bored, and placed a single sheet of paper in the center of the table. It was the original digital trace of the attempted wire transfer from the escrow account, the $5,000 Graham had tried to steal the week he left me. Mr. Sutter claimed this was an attempt to retrieve joint funds, Elliot said, his voice dry. But we subpoenaed the routing instructions. Elliot pointed to the destination account number on the paper. The money was not being sent to Mr. Sutter's personal account. Elliot continued. It was being routed to a business account registered to Pike Productions. That is the entity owned by Ms. Rowan Pike. The room went dead silent. Graham's face drained of color. He looked like a man who had just realized he was standing on a trap door. He had not just tried to steal my money. He had tried to steal my money to fund his new girlfriend's production company. He had forged my signature to pay for his entry ticket into her world. The arbitrator looked at Graham with an expression of pure disdain. The ruling was swift. The countersuit was dismissed with prejudice. Graham was ordered to pay my legal fees. A protective order was issued, barring him from contacting me or using any Blue Hollow data in perpetuity. It was not a dramatic explosion. It was a controlled demolition. Graham's brand of authenticity did not survive the collision with hard facts. The aftermath played out on the screens I rarely checked. 2 days after the hearing, Rowan Pike posted a long black-and-white text statement on her Instagram. She claimed she had been deceived by a partner who misrepresented his access and ownership. She framed herself as another victim of Graham's instability. She announced she was severing all creative and personal ties with him to protect her energy. She threw him to the wolves to save her own reputation. I watched it happen from my desk in Louisiana. I felt no joy. I felt no vindication. I simply felt the satisfaction of a task marked complete. The variable had been isolated and removed. The system was stable. 6 months later, the project in Red Ash County was finished. The pumps were running. The town was dry. I returned to Marrow Bay on a Tuesday. The fog was rolling in off the sound, thick and smelling of salt. I drove straight to the house on the bluff. I signed the final closing papers alone. There was no cosigner. There was no partner to hold my hand. My wrist did not shake. I walked into the empty house. It smelled of sawdust and new paint. The light in the sunroom was exactly as beautiful as Graham had said it was. But now, it didn't belong to his camera. It belonged to my eyes. The first thing I did was call a locksmith. I did not just rekey the doors. I replaced the entire hardware system. I installed a digital keypad with a code that only existed in my head. I secured the perimeter. I unpacked my boxes. I put my engineering reference books on the built-in shelves. I put my comfortable gray couch in the living room, and then I took the old brass key, the one Graham had held in his hand that night, the one I had forced him to give back in the diner, and I did something practical with it. I mounted it on a small piece of dark walnut wood. I hung it on the wall of my home office, right above my monitor. Beneath it, I used a label maker to print 2 words: access revoked. It was not a trophy. I did not keep it to remember him. I kept it as a boundary. It was a physical reminder that access to my life, my home, and my work is a privilege, not a right. And once that privilege is abused, it is never granted again. A week later, Elliot drove up from the city. He didn't call first. He just sent a text that said, "I have a bottle of scotch that is older than the case law we used to crush him." I opened the door. He was standing on the porch, wearing a flannel shirt and jeans, holding the bottle. He looked at the new keypad lock and nodded approvingly. "Solid," he said. We sat on the back deck, watching the ocean churn against the cliffs. We didn't talk about Graham. We didn't talk about Rowan. We talked about the structural integrity of the retaining wall I was planning to build. We talked about the quiet. He did not try to hold my hand. He did not try to sell me a story about our future. He just sat there, drinking his scotch, comfortable in the silence. I looked at him, and then I looked out at the water. I realized that for the first time in my life, I wasn't waiting for the other shoe to drop. I wasn't bracing for impact. I was the impact. The sun went down, turning the sky a deep, bruising purple. I stood up and walked to the edge of the deck, feeling the wind whip my hair across my face. I was 36 years old. I was alone. I was tired. But I was standing on my own ground. I was holding the only key that mattered. Graham had said I was too structured. He said I verify too much. He was right. I verified that he was a liar. I verified that I was strong. And I verified that the best revenge isn't screaming in the rain. It is locking the door, turning off the lights, and sleeping soundly in a house that you paid for yourself. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from today. So please leave a comment down below and share your thoughts on Addison's journey. If you enjoyed this story, please invite your friends to subscribe to the channel Morgan Revenge Stories. Like this video, and hit that hype button so we can get this story out to more people who need to hear it.